You've played XCOM, you've likely played Gears Tactics. I'm sure there's an install of Mario and Rabbids Kingdom Battle out there somewhere on one of your hidden SD cards for your Switch. Don't hide it, I will find it. However, if you're tuned into this review, there's likely been one question on your mind since this game has come out in December. Where does Marvel's Midnight Suns stack against the gamut of, let's say, tactical games that are out there currently today? Now, with over 100 hours of gameplay poured in, I wanted to cover an objective review of Marvel's Midnight Suns, going over all things that we dislike, all things that we love about the game, and as well all things we're looking forward to in the future. That's right, we're gonna start with the negatives first. That by no means is an indication that I believe that Marvel's Midnight Suns is a 2 out of 10 or a terrible gaming experience. If you want the short and narrow spoiler experience, I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10 just from my experiences alone. Now, question for our viewers and the sub-boss community at large. For a review perspective, what would you rather prefer, combined with your attention span, have you? Would you rather someone spend the first 5 minutes going over a review, putting a rose-colored filter on the experience, getting on a soapbox, real preachy about the positives, what they love about the game, almost misguiding you into what the actual game kind of entails on the back end? Or, from a review perspective, would you rather start off with knowing where the game falls short from our perspective and then qualifying that against what experience you're ultimately looking for with any of the games we'll be reviewing going forward? Totally honest question. I want to gather your feedback, so leave a comment below about what review experience you usually consider more genuine in that sense. So with all that said, let's unpack this cluster. Welcome back, sub bosses, and a big howdy to all of our brand new viewers out there. My name is Boss Ron, and from the 5-minute tangent beforehand, that's right, today we're covering our very first review on the channel, specifically targeting Marvel's Midnight Suns. Marvel's Midnight Suns is a brand new tactical gaming experience developed by heavy hitters in the genre itself, Firaxis Studios. This studio is also behind the XCOM series. From what I've been able to gather through general hearsay, also chatting with friends who have played the game itself beforehand, this pretty much set the bar for a lot of tactical games to essentially branch themselves off of and develop a framework of themselves for how they operate. With that said, this studio is essentially the bar setter, not only for other developers looking to make games in this genre, but themselves. So we have a brand new tactical game developed by Firaxis that, through partnership, has the ability to leverage properties from the Marvel franchises themselves. Should be a home run when you really think about it, but how did that turn out? Well, let's take a look. So, briefly, about the story to explain how our titular heroes get here. Hydra is essentially being Hydra, up to no good. They've taken a page out of Blizzard's book and are now interacting with demonic creatures of lore, specifically Lilith. Now, in-game, Lilith is a key contributor in the prophecy of the Midnight Sun, which is to bring about eternal night or something of that nature. Hydra read about it inside the Darkhold, thought that sounded cool, and wanted to move forth with this plot. So you've got Hydra, they're partnered with Lilith and her demonic companions. They're going against an unlikely alliance of the Runaways, the Avengers, combined with some members of the X-Men, and hey, even Spider-Man is in there as well too. So it's up to this alliance to band together, put aside what possible differences they have to thwart the Hydra operation from a global perspective and prevent the Midnight Sun from happening, where the demonic forces of hell invade, and maybe there's a cameo from Doom Guy after he gets off of Mars. Now, taking down these operations is where you're going to spend most of your time, as time in itself is of the essence. How you do that is by combining the forces of 3 particular characters that you have unlocked at the time. There are characters that you can unlock later on throughout the story as it develops. So you pick your 3 characters, you thrust them into combat, and how that battle actually plays out is by way of a, let's say, deck-based mechanic. And this is very similar to another game that's out there known as Fighting in Tight Spaces. And the battles play out almost as similar to Fits. You drop into a combat area, the deck that you've put together, some of the cards are dealt out to you on a random basis where now you have to make work what you have and also replenish those cards as you go throughout individualized turns, where on your off turn, the enemy now has their chance to attack you, reposition, or potentially set up and complete their objectives. So, honorable mention, if you haven't played Fits, check it out. If you have, it's going to feel like putting on a glove. coming into Marvel's Midnight Suns. So the unique difference is you're not just controlling one hero, you're controlling 3 heroes and subsequently the decks of those heroes that you've built out before you've actually launched the mission. So these factors, combined with the ability to interact with the environment and essentially double your damage, paired with the unique enemy types, directly contribute into why I've been able to, let's say, pump up my gameplay hours so far since this game has only been released in December. Marvel's Midnight Suns' core gameplay experience is fun enough to make every new mission feel like a brand new puzzle that you have to solve in the most efficient way, combined with the variability of the heroes that you bring into battle and how you've actually stacked their decks up going into it too. Outside of the core gameplay experience, when you start to look at the broader picture of what's being presented to you inside of Marvel's Midnight Suns, something doesn't necessarily add up with what you do outside of the operations itself. And what I mean by that is through the story itself, it dictates a sense of urgency as you're progressing through the campaigns and you're watching some of the cutscenes, right? The world is starting to end. Hydra is starting to win bit by bit and kind of catch our heroes off guard. However, none of that is really essentially reflected back into what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. Once you're done with the operations and outside of the core gameplay elements, if you will, the rest of your time in-game is spent in the hub world known as the Abbey, which is just a location that exists in a pocket reality. Our heroes are able to rest up, kind of tactically plan for, what's ahead, gear up for the next adventure, and upgrade and spar and train their abilities so they're a bit better going into the next battle. So as the protagonist, you'll navigate the Abbey, you have the ability to upgrade your abilities, strategize what heroes you want to kind of bring into the next battle with you, and edit their decks so that way you can kind of determine if you want, let's say, Doctor Strange to be more attack focused or more support focused. Outside of that, when you start to kind of select your mission and jump in, when we talk about that sense of urgency, nothing is really reflected back in how you actually select your missions outside of what's going on in the story. And what I mean by that is when you're off to select your next mission, the only real reward you get for not doing the story missions are just additional cards for those characters you brought into battle that you have to randomly select from that may or may not upgrade their abilities a bit further. There really is nothing that kind of contributes a bit outward beyond that. So the loop is designed to jump into a mission, complete it, get some cards, upgrade your heroes, get them ready for the next battle, or more importantly, some of the harder story missions that take place during some of the later chapters of the game. And that's where some of the negatives started to first rear their head for me throughout my 100 hours of gameplay with Marvel's Midnight Suns, was that it essentially felt as if I was starting to almost grind for nothing. I'm collecting cards, but I've already have my deck set, built out the way I want it to. So outside of card collecting, completing the missions after a certain point don't really have necessarily any kind of impact that would make you want to really go back and replay outside of just ham-fisting in the story, even if there is a new game plus, just kind of going through that because that's the only way the world progresses. I would have loved to see a worldly indicator that climbs as you gradually go throughout the game and, let's say, neglect some other regions because you're doing missions elsewhere, right? And if you go back into that region, you're now locked into a guaranteed very hard engagement where a villain or some of the bosses actually come out and start to make things a bit more difficult for you as you navigate through that operation itself. Some kind of system that makes it feel a bit more alive and interactive. As far as interactivity, the only real call out you get, especially with tracking how many days it takes for you to, let's say, get through a campaign, is that some of the characters will start to just throw weird remarks at you when they start to read, hey, we've been 3 months or 6 months into this. I can't believe how fucking crazy it's been, huh? There's really no impact your primary heroes have on this world, subsequently your secondary characters as well. One thing that I do give this game credit for is that it does have a large roster of heroes that you can choose from, specifically from different teams that we've mentioned, right? Some people from the Runaways, you have Blade, you've got X-Men, you've also got Spider-Man thrown in there, so there's a large list of people you can choose from. But outside of just bringing those heroes in, more so, even if you like playing as the protagonist, that kind of cuts down your choice of hero as well. The other 9 or 10, even outside of the season pass characters, kind of just sit there doing nothing, really collecting dust. There are some AFK missions you can run them on where they take a day to complete, essentially one cycle of you going in and completing an operation, but in order for you to actually send them off on those missions, you have to then complete a mission from the mirror table that gives you an intel cache that enables some of your heroes to go off and venture. There's no other resource that you can spend to send them out there, so if you're not really focused on getting intel caches that day, everyone's just kind of hanging around doing nothing, but there's this idea that the sky is legitimately falling and everyone's just on the couch playing video games. There are a few quality of life scenarios that aren't necessarily a deal killer for those considering picking up Midnight Suns, but sometimes just an inconvenience. When we talk about building out your deck for your hero, you are required to bring a attack and a defensive ability on top of some of your specials. Like, there's an actual limitation between how many you can have or how many you cannot have. Kind of funnels you into playing a specific way, especially if you have like a super support or defensive minded idea for one character, like let's say Doctor Strange for example. Outside of that, really just a gripe, not anything super terrible to write home about. Well, that's enough about the negatives. Let's jump into the positives and discuss what we actually like about Marvel's Midnight Suns. But before we do that, please be sure to leave a like on the video if you've made it this far in the review. Also too, comment down below what hero are you all looking forward to playing when you do eventually pick up a copy of Midnight Suns. Personally, I'm having a lot of fun rocking around with Captain America, Wolverine, and Spider-Man, swapping out between a combination of those guys. There's a lot of honorable mentions here. I just know that I have those guys on my list. Super fun to play as, and to be honest, a lot of the roster is really fun to play. No one has been quite a, let's say, stinker, if you will. So let's jump into the positives. Honestly, the positives are super easy to get into with Marvel's Midnight Suns. We've actually been peppering them up throughout some of the negative bits too for this review. Starting with the combat, yes, it's a deck-based tactical game, and that may or may not be everyone's cup of tea, considering you don't have the ability to control your hero in full or fight them as you would against enemy fodder. Considering how Marvel's Avengers worked out, that may or may not be a good thing. But as you're building that deck and deploying out those moves for the heroes you've selected, a lot of their abilities are really true to character and actually make it feel fun to actually leverage them in a fight. It almost makes a case for more superhero properties to kind of follow this tactical landscape going forward. I think it might be the best way we can see most of these abilities actually get realized. As a benefit, you also get a game that's very aware of the Marvel mythos itself. It doesn't just centralize itself around MCU characters. It pulls in a lot of characters from comic properties themselves. You have villains like Venom, of course he was shown in the trailer, other villains we won't really get into that haven't really been seen in an MCU movie but exist heavily in the comics, right? So whether you're a comics fan, whether you're an MCU fan, there's definitely something that you will enjoy jumping into this game and be able to resonate with immediately upon leveraging some of these characters, or even seeing some of the cooler cameos that are happening throughout. The wide selection of heroes that you can select from actually kind of lead to some pretty cool combinations that you can bring up, which actually makes me very hopeful for the future with the way the mythos is actually, treated throughout the game. Also too, with what we've already seen from the first season pass coming out, I do hope this game has a longer future than just this first cycle, as well as some additional features that hopefully get brought into the game to make it feel more alive, especially in endgame territory. And for what it's worth, even outside of the bright future, the protagonist you play as the Hunter, And for what it's worth, outside of its bright future, one of the really highlight spots for this game for me was actually the protagonist itself, the Hunter. During its development, when we were starting to see some of the trailers and teasers come out, I was definitely one of the ones on my soapbox against having original characters brought into a game like this, because I felt it would just kind of gunk up what really didn't need it to be gunked up when you have powerhouse heroes like Iron Man and Wolverine and Captain America showing up to get into a three-man team and go against Hydra itself. More importantly, didn't want this new OC to then look like a paperweight compared to some of our favorite heroes, but I gotta say, some of the abilities you can actually choose from as the Hunter makes me choose him as a solid lock, or an anchor if you will, for all of my combat scenarios, outside of the added benefit that he's also the only character that cannot get injured, so super fucking helpful there. Through our gameplay, we haven't finished the story mode quite yet. We don't know what endgame currently looks like on the channel. I'll be sure to revisit this review with my additional findings. However, I think it's safe to say with the amount of time we spent, I'm not really going to see any additional features that I'm hoping for introduced in endgame outside of a new game plus that you could hopefully just start up with the entire roster unlocked for you at that time. Of course, the first, hopefully not only season pass is upon us. I think we're supposed to initially get Deadpool as that first character, moving into the likes of Venom, Morbius, as well as Storm are also going to be coming out of that pack, each with their own subsequent chapters too. So really curious to see if any new features or mechanics are implemented with their campaigns that we run through that start to make the world feel a bit more alive, rather than just I'm cycling through missions and kind of just repeating the same steps and getting a different puzzle to solve. That's really going to be my only gripe here, that, you know, if that's really the case, the way the combat's built out, I'm perfectly okay with it, and that's why I've spent about 100+ hours, unfortunately, on this game. I'm pretty sure 20 of those were just leaving it active while watching whatever game was on at that time. Ultimately, you've came here to have another subliminal question answered, which is, how should Marvel's Midnight Suns impact my wallet? Of which I would recommend you wait for Marvel's Midnight Suns to go on sale. If you're on the fence about the game because you've played other tactical experiences beforehand like XCOM or Gears Tactics, those are the only two that come to mind from my head, but I think you will still find a grander experience out of those two games that Midnight Suns quite doesn't reach, and maybe will reach one day. I think is still more focused on getting more players introduced into the tactical genre. So if you're a Marvel head, if you're brand new to tactical gaming itself, pick up Marvel's Midnight Suns when you can on sale. Even better if you can find that season pass on sale, because jeez, that thing is $50. And that's really it. I'm off to fight crime in New York City while the sky falls all around us. Let me know what you all think about the review down below in the comments. Leave a like on the video. Also, subscribe to the channel. Become a sub boss. We'll be doing more reviews going into the future of this year. That'll be something we'll introduce here as new. So Midnight Suns, we'll do a review. We'll do even a followed review maybe a couple months later to just see if some of our initial thoughts hold up. As always, viewers and returning sub bosses, thanks again. My name is Boss Ron. I'll catch you guys next time.